The first sign of death was not silence but sound, an echo stretched too long across the spires of a dying world. It came through the voxnet as static at first, a whisper folded within the hum of industry, so faint that the administratum clerks dismissed it as atmospheric interference, but by the third rotation the hum itself began to fade. The manufactoria grew quiet. Conveyor lines that had roared for millennia slowed to a stop. The servitors ceased their labor mid-motion, their augmetics twitching in confusion, as if awaiting orders that would never come. And then, as dawn rose over the endless hive towers of Lumia Primus, billions looked to the sky and realized that the light was dimmer than it had ever been. No transmission left the planet after that day. No transport arrived. No astropathic choir sang its presence into the void. It was as if the world had been cut from the Emperor's light, erased from his gaze, severed from his mercy. The Hive still stood, its towers sharp as knives, its catacombs deep as nightmares, but inside those walls there was only stillness, cinematic parts. The Hive had always sung. Even in its most distant corridors where the walls sweated rust and the air tasted like iron and dust, the sound of industry never ceased. It was a constant, a rhythm so vast that it blended into the background of existence itself. From the highest spire where the nobles dined on vat-grown delicacies beneath domes of stained crystal, to the lowest sump where the forgotten toiled knee-deep in chemical sludge, every breath, every vibration, every heartbeat of Lumia Primus was synchronized to that mechanical hymn. It was the song of life on a hive world, a melody of servitors clanking, turbines roaring, vox casters humming, and the endless murmur of billions at work. It was the sound of obedience, devotion, and survival. And then, one morning, it faltered. No one noticed at first. The shift was subtle, a tremor too small to name. A single conveyor line paused in one of the manufactoria of level 82, halting mid-cycle as a servitor's augmetic limbs twitched aimlessly in the air. A tech adept scowled, muttered a prayer to the Omnissiah, and struck the control rune with the handle of his wrench. The machine stuttered back to life for a few moments, then went still again. He didn't report it. Why would he? Machines falter. The Emperor endures. But by the second rotation, the outages spread. Entire manufactorums fell silent for minutes at a time, their lights flickering, their vox links dead. The hab blocks above them began to cool as the energy grids failed in irregular pulses, plunging entire sectors into intermittent darkness. Still, the clerks of the administratum dismissed it as a local fault, an error in the plasma conduits. The Hive had endured worse. To most, it was nothing more than a mild inconvenience, a disruption in the rhythm, not the end of the song. For the workers below, though, it was different. They lived by sound, the thrum of the engines, the grinding of the conveyor lines, the crackle of the vox. To hear silence was to hear death. And when the machine stopped, the people began to whisper. They whispered of ghosts in the circuitry, of the Omnissiah turning his gaze away, of spirits unappeased by the constant churn of the forges. Down in the sump, where superstition was as common as hunger, prayers to the machine, God grew desperate. Offerings of oil and bone were left beside rusted cogitators. Still, the silence deepened. By the fourth rotation, even the upper spires began to notice. The noble towers of Lumia Primus, where light had always shone brightest, dimmed under a haze of malfunctioning lumens. The vox grills that relayed endless litanies of devotion crackled and went dead. Messages ceased mid-transmission, their endings swallowed by static. And for the first time in recorded memory, the planet's great orbital array sent nothing to the void. No astropathic song, no request, no prayer. only silence. In the administratum tower, the adepts gathered around their data slates in confusion. One of them, a thin, sleepless man named Varn, listened to the Voxnet with trembling hands. "It's interference," he told himself, adjusting the frequency. "It's just interference." But as he leaned closer to the speaker, he realized the static wasn't random. Beneath the crackle, there was something else, a pattern, faint and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. It pulsed once every 7 seconds, then 6, then 5, faster each time. He recoiled, pulling the plug free. The sound stopped instantly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. That night, the lower hive burned. No one could say how it started, a riot perhaps, or a reactor failure, but the flames spread through the hab levels faster than reason. Without power, the suppression servitors never came. Without communication, no one knew where to run. From the higher platforms, the nobles watched the glow of the fires rise through the haze, mistaking it for the light of industry restored. When the smoke reached the upper towers, it brought with it the scent of promethium and charred flesh. The next day, the Arbates sealed off the lower levels entirely, declaring them contaminated. Those trapped inside were left to their prayers. The silence became a presence. It wasn't absence anymore. It was something that lingered, something that pressed against the skin, filled the ears, crawled beneath the thoughts. Workers began reporting voices in the static, whispers in the air vents, flickers of light that followed them down the corridors. In the maintenance sector of Sump Delta, a servitor walked into a wall and stayed there for an hour, repeating a single phrase in binary cant. No signal, no master, no light. When the tech priests finally arrived to dismantle it, they found its vocal cords burned black and its eyes still glowing faintly blue. The Magos overseeing the Hive's infrastructure issued a decree. All Vox transmissions were to be suspended until purification rites could be performed. His words were relayed across the Hive in chanted binary, echoing from speaker to speaker like a sermon recited by ghosts. But even as he spoke, the power grids failed again. Entire spires went dark. The lights of Lumea Primus flickered once, twice, and died. For the first time in 10,000 years, night fell across the Hive. And in that night, the silence spoke. In the tunnels beneath the manufactorums, a scavenger named Rill awoke to find the world still. He had lived his whole life surrounded by noise, the hum of the coolant pipes, the throb of the reactors, the endless chatter of the lower markets. Now, there was nothing, not even the sound of dripping water. He rose, heart pounding, and stepped into the corridor. The air was thick with dust and the faint scent of burned oil. Ahead, the lumen strips flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. Then, from the far end of the passage, came a whisper. It wasn't a voice, exactly, more like a sigh of static rising and falling in rhythm with his own breath. He froze, straining to hear. The sound came again, clearer this time, forming words that should not have been possible without a Vox grill. "Do you hear it?" He turned, but there was no one there. Only the hum of his own pulse in his ears. Rill ran. He didn't stop until he reached the stairwell leading to the upper levels, where hundreds had gathered in confusion, clutching data slates that no longer worked, shouting into dead Vox beads. Above them, the Hive's titanic reactor towers loomed like the ribs of a sleeping god, their glow fading into nothing. Someone began to pray aloud, their voice shaking. Others joined, chanting the Emperor's name, begging for his light to return. But the silence swallowed their voices, devouring them until only the echo of their own fear remained. And then, in that perfect, terrible quiet, something deep beneath the hive stirred. Something that had been waiting. Something that remembered what silence meant. The sound came first as a vibration, subtle, like the stirring of the world's buried bones. The floor trembled beneath their feet, dust drifting down from the ceilings in pale threads. Somewhere far below, deep in the sublevels that hadn't seen a living soul in centuries, something vast and old had begun to move. Rill stood among the others in the stairwell, his hand pressed against the cold metal wall, feeling the pulse through his palm. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the rhythm of a reactor spool or turbine shaft. It was too organic, too deliberate. He could feel the faint suggestion of breathing. The others noticed it too. One by one, their arguments and prayers faded into uneasy silence, until all that remained was the steady vibration rising from below. The tremor lasted for almost a full minute, then stopped as abruptly as it began. The stillness that followed was worse. The air seemed heavier, thicker. It pressed against the skin like the deep ocean. No one spoke. Somewhere in the crowd, a child began to cry, and that small, human sound broke the spell for an instant. Rill turned toward the nearest exit tunnel, his instincts screaming for distance from whatever lay beneath them. But as he moved, a voice cut through the silence, clear, calm, amplified through unseen vox grills that should have been dead. "Citizens of Lumia Primus," it said, "remain where you are. The disturbance is being addressed. The Emperor protects." The relief that swept through the crowd was instant. People fell to their knees, tears streaking their faces as they repeated the words like a mantra. The Vox network was working again, they said. The authorities were restoring order. But Rill didn't kneel. He looked up at the nearest speaker grill and felt the skin on his arms rise. The voice had been too precise, too even. It hadn't sounded like a man, or even a machine. It had sounded empty, as if it were reading from a script with no understanding of its meaning. Moments later, the lights returned, but they weren't the pale gold of the hive's normal lumens. They burned white-blue, cold and pulsing, flickering in an unnatural rhythm that made the shadows seem alive. Across the metal walls, faint lines of binary text began to scroll. Prayers of the Mechanicus rewritten in patterns too fast to read. Some of the crowd began to scream. Others simply stared, their faces blank, as if mesmerized. Then came the smell. Ozone and burning metal, sharp and electric. Sparks danced across the floor as the power conduits overloaded, lighting the chamber with strobing flashes. The speakers flared again. "The disturbance is being addressed." Over and over, louder each time. Rill covered his ears, but the words burrowed through the noise, through the skin, through the skull. He could feel them vibrating inside his teeth. People began collapsing, their hands clamped over their ears, blood running from their noses. The sound wasn't a message anymore. It was a frequency, something that resonated not just in the air, but in the body. He stumbled toward the exit, his vision blurring, and slammed his hand against the manual release of the hatch. It refused to open. When he looked back, he saw that the others had gone still. Completely still. Every man, woman, and child stood frozen in place, their eyes open, their mouths slightly parted. The blue light reflected in their pupils like the glow of dead stars. The speakers went silent. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, all at once, every one of them turned their heads toward him. He ran. The corridors of Lumia Primus had always felt endless, but now they twisted upon themselves like a maze. The familiar signs, the numbered hatches, the waypoints carved into the walls, all gone, erased by the flickering light. He could hear footsteps behind him, not hurried, but steady, synchronized. The sound of hundreds walking in unison. Every time he turned a corner, the shadows seemed closer, the walls narrower. Somewhere, a Vox unit crackled to life again, whispering the same phrase over and over. "The Emperor protects, the Emperor protects." Each repetition grew quieter, as if the hive itself was running out of breath. He found refuge in a maintenance shaft. Crawling inside, he sealed the hatch and waited, his heart hammering in his chest. The blue light outside dimmed to nothing. For a while, there was only silence again, the kind that suffocated thought. Then, faintly, from the vents above, came the sound of machinery waking, the whir of servos, the click of gears, the hum of life returning to the manufactorums. He crawled closer to the vent and peered through. Below him stretched one of the great production lines of the lower hive. For centuries, those machines had built everything from armor plating to shell casings to the metal bones of Hab spires. Now, they moved again. But there were no workers, no servitors. The conveyor lines ran empty, yet every cog and piston turned with purpose. He watched as robotic arms extended over the vacant assembly belts, moving in perfect precision, but assembling nothing. It was as if the hive's machinery was performing its own liturgy, a ritual motion stripped of meaning but filled with devotion. Rill felt the faint vibration return, stronger now, pulsing through the floor beneath his knees. It came in waves, each one accompanied by a faint sound from deep within the earth, something between a moan and a sigh. The machines below slowed, then stopped. The lights dimmed to a dull red glow, and in that dying illumination, something rose from the far end of the manufactorum. It was vast, humanoid only in outline, its form composed of interlocking metal and bone. Cables trailed from its spine like veins of iron. Its head was a mask of twisted Vox grills and sensor arrays that sparked intermittently with faint light. Rill could hear the static rising from it, see the dust vibrate on the floor in waves as it exhaled through a dozen mechanical lungs. The machines bowed toward it, their limbs lowering as though in reverence. He did not breathe. He could not. The figure raised one hand. Massive, skeletal, and glistening with oil. The air thickened. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, through every speaker, every conduit, every fragment of the hive's dead network, the same voice returned. But this time, it was no longer calm. It was vast. It filled the world. Order, restored. The words were not reassurance. They were judgment. Above, in the spires where the nobles had once dined, the Vox systems reignited. Every transmission from the upper hive was flooded with the same phrase, repeated endlessly in the binary chant of the machine god. The Magos and his priests gathered in panic around their sacred terminals, chanting the litany of reset in desperate tones. But their prayers were devoured by the noise. One by one, the machines around them flickered to life on their own. Unplugged systems glowing with impossible power, data slates rewriting themselves with streams of code too complex to decipher. Through the storm of signals, one message repeated in every frequency, every dialect, every channel. Lumea Primus is complete. No one knew what it meant, not yet. But in the depths below, Rill began to understand. The hive wasn't dying. It was awakening. He could not remember how long he had remained inside that shaft. Time had lost its shape, dissolving into the endless hum of machinery rising through the bones of the hive. The light had shifted from blue to red, then to a pale amber glow that pulsed softly in rhythm with something far beneath the surface. He had stopped trying to count the cycles. His hunger had gone quiet days ago. The thirst was dull now, replaced by a strange serenity, as if the silence itself had seeped into his blood. He no longer prayed. The Emperor's name felt foreign on his tongue, like a word from a life that belonged to someone else. Through the narrow vent, he watched the manufactorum below. The machines still moved, precise and tireless, performing motions that no longer produced anything. Conveyor lines turned without purpose. Assembly arms reached for phantom components. Furnaces glowed, though nothing was fed to them. It was ritual without reason, but there was beauty in it. A terrible, devotional beauty. Each gear turned as though guided by faith alone. Each piston exhaled like a penitent repeating an endless prayer. At first, he thought the silence had driven him mad, that his mind had conjured order to replace despair. But then he noticed the pattern. The machines were not simply moving, they were communicating. Each pause, each rotation, each spark was deliberate, part of a sequence that repeated across the manufactorum with mathematical precision. He didn't understand the language, but he felt its cadence in his chest. It wasn't human speech. It wasn't even binary. It was something older, deeper, a pulse beneath reason. When the first human voices returned, they came not through the vox, but from the floors below. Faint chanting rose through the vents. Hoarse, rhythmic, mechanical in tone. He crawled closer, pressing his ear against the cold metal. The words were fragmented, swallowed by the echo, but he caught enough to feel the chill sink into his marrow. Silence is order. Order is devotion. Devotion is flesh. The voices multiplied, growing louder with every repetition, until the sound filled the air like a tide. Then came the footsteps again. Hundreds of them, perfectly synchronized. He peered through the vent's grate and saw them emerge from the tunnels. Men, women, and servitors alike, walking side by side. Their eyes glowed faintly with the same amber hue as the lights. Their movements were precise, deliberate, identical. No one spoke, no one looked around. They moved as one, a single organism wearing 1,000 faces. They gathered at the center of the manufactorum, surrounding the great machine that had risen days before. Its head tilted downward, watching them in silence. Cables uncoiled from its back like tendrils, snaking toward the crowd. Some of them knelt. Others lifted their arms as though an offering. The cables descended and touched them gently on the crown of their heads. Where they made contact, the flesh shimmered with light. When the light faded, the people stood straighter, their movements sharper, their faces serene. Rill watched in horror as more and more joined the ritual. They came willingly, their expressions blissful, unafraid. He could hear the sound they made when the cables reached them, not screams but sighs, the sound of surrender. The transformation was instant. Whatever they had been before, laborers, priests, enforcers, they were one now. Their individuality burned away like vapor. He tried to crawl backward, but his elbow brushed against the vent wall, sending a faint clang into the stillness. The machine's head turned. Slowly. Its sensor arrays flared, scanning the shadows. Rill froze, his breath shallow. The crowd below turned as well, every head swiveling toward his hiding place in perfect unison. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the machine spoke. Human anomaly detected. The words reverberated through the metal, echoing into his bones. The cables withdrew from the crowd, rising toward the ceiling. The people turned and began walking, not toward the machine now, but toward the walls, toward him. Rill scrambled backward through the shaft, crawling as fast as his limbs would allow. The vents echoed with the sound of pursuit, hands striking metal, feet scraping across steel. The amber light flickered behind him, growing brighter with every turn. He reached an access hatch and slammed his palm against the release rune. It didn't open. He struck it again, harder, whispering the machine God's prayer through trembling lips. The rune flared once, then dimmed. "Please," he whispered, "please open." A sound answered him, faint, distorted, coming from somewhere beyond the hatch. It was a voice, speaking through static. "Do you hear it?" He froze. The same words he had heard on the first night when the silence had begun. Only this time the voice was not human. It was layered, multiplied, as if 1,000 mouths were speaking through the same throat. The hatch unlocked. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he pulled it open and crawled through. The space beyond was vast, a cathedral of machinery. Towering columns of iron stretched upward into the darkness, each carved with sacred sigils and dripping with condensation. The floor was a mirror of black metal, reflecting the dim orange light that pulsed from above. At the far end of the chamber stood a figure cloaked in red robes, its back turned. "Magos," Riel whispered, relief flooding him. The figure turned. Where the Magos's face should have been was a mask of fused circuitry. Its eyes were hollow sockets filled with shifting light. Tubes ran from its neck into the walls, feeding its flesh to the hive itself. When it spoke, the sound was the hive's sound, the harmony of machines, the choir of devotion. "Fear not," it said, stepping forward. "The Omnissiah has heard us." Riel stumbled backward. "The machines, they're wrong. They're moving without command, The Magos raised a hand. "They move with command, a purer command than ours. They have achieved alignment. The noise has ended. The hive is one." "I've seen what it's doing to them," Riel said. "You call it unity. It's not. It's death." The Magos tilted its head, the light behind its mask pulsing gently. "There is no death, only silence. The Emperor's voice is order. We have become his echo." Riel turned and ran. The Magos did not follow. Its voice filled the chamber once more, resonating through every metal surface, calm and certain. Silence is the Emperor's blessing. As Riel fled through the endless corridors, the hive began to speak in harmony. Every machine, every vent, every broken vox grill murmured the same words, over and over, until they filled the air like a storm. Silence is order. Order is devotion. Devotion is flesh. And beneath it all, the pulse continued, the heartbeat of something vast, ancient, and awake. Somewhere deep in the abyss below, Lumea Primus exhaled. The corridors stretched into infinity. Every path Riel took seemed to bend back into itself, as though the hive's geometry had shifted, warping reality into a labyrinth of steel and shadow. The deeper he ran, the more alive the walls became. Pipes hissed with heat and breath. The vents exhaled faint clouds of vapor that smelled like oil and blood. Somewhere far away, machinery roared back to life in deep, guttural tones, like the waking growl of something immense beneath the skin of the world. He moved through it half-blind, guided by instinct more than sight. The glow of the lumen strips had turned a pale, pulsating gold, fading and brightening in rhythm with that constant pulse he could feel beneath his boots. Every time it surged, the air trembled. The dust on the ground lifted for a second, as if drawn upward by invisible force. He realized the hum was not only coming from below anymore. It was within the hive's walls themselves. The entire structure was vibrating as though it had a heartbeat. He stumbled into an old transit tunnel that had once carried cargo trams across the lower levels. The rails were rusted and half buried in grime, the ceiling a patchwork of corroded panels and exposed cabling. In the distance, a faint orange glow flickered. Light, or perhaps fire. He moved toward it cautiously, each step echoing too loudly. When he reached the source, he found not a fire, but a cluster of people gathered around a burning promethium torch jammed into a crack in the floor. Their faces were gaunt, smeared with soot, their eyes wide and trembling. The glow cast their features in shifting shades of orange and black, making them look half dead. Rill almost turned back, but the sound of his approach made them look up at once. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then one of them, a woman wrapped in a torn administratum cloak, let out a small gasp. "Someone else," she whispered. "You're alive?" He nodded, though the word felt meaningless now. "For now," he said hoarsely. They pulled him closer to the light, their questions tumbling over one another. How had he survived the purge? Were the upper levels still burning? Had the Arbites come? He could only shake his head. There were no answers left to give. The Hive was dead, or worse, something other than dead. The woman stared into the flame. "It started as silence," she murmured. "Then came the light. Now it's in everything. The walls hum when we sleep. The water tastes like metal. My son," her voice broke. "He started speaking a machine prayer 2 nights ago. He doesn't even know what it means. He just says it." Another man, a gaunt worker with augmetic eyes, nodded slowly. "It's in the air now. You breathe it, and it learns you." He turned his gaze toward Rill. "You can feel it, can't you, the pulse? It's in your chest." Rill didn't answer, but he could feel it. The heartbeat of the Hive had synchronized with his own. A sudden tremor rippled through the tunnel, shaking loose dust from the ceiling. The torch flickered violently, then steadied. Somewhere far away, a sound like metal tearing against metal echoed through the depths. The survivors huddled closer together. "They say it's the Omnissiah," the woman whispered. "That he's come to bring order." "It's not the Omnissiah," Rill said. "It's something else." The man with augmetic eyes leaned forward, studying him carefully. "You've seen it?" Rill nodded slowly. "It was in the manufactorum. It's building something. Or maybe becoming something." The man smiled faintly, though it was not the smile of hope. "Then it's already too late." Before Rill could speak, a sound cut through the tunnel. A faint chime, crystalline and pure, echoing from the walls like a prayer bell. The survivors froze. The man's smile widened, his mechanical eyes flickering with gold light. "It's calling," he whispered. "Do you hear it?" Rill shook his head. "Don't listen." But it was too late. The woman dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she began to mumble words Rill couldn't understand. One by one, the others followed, their voices weaving into a low, rhythmic chant. The chime grew louder, its tone warping into something both melodic and agonizing, a sound that reached directly into the mind and tugged at the threads of thought. Rill clamped his hands over his ears, but it made no difference. The sound wasn't in the air, it was inside him. It filled his skull, a perfect tone that drowned out everything else. His vision blurred. For a moment, he saw light. Not the glow of lumens or fire, but something vast and golden, spreading like veins through the darkness. It moved with purpose, threading through metal and flesh alike. It was the Hive, alive and aware, stretching its mind across every cable, every wall, every heart still beating within it. He staggered backward, knocking the torch from its place. Flames spilled across the ground, licking at the debris. The sudden burst of fire broke the trance for a few of them, but most continued chanting, their voices rising with unnatural precision. He ran. Behind him, the sound of chanting turned to screams. The fire spread fast, climbing up the cracked walls, igniting the fungus that grew along the pipes. He didn't look back until he reached the next junction, and when he did, he saw them burning. Not writhing in pain, but standing perfectly still as the flames consumed them, their mouths still moving in silent prayer. Their eyes glowed white until they burst. Rill fell to his knees, gasping. He wanted to pray, but there were no words left that meant anything. The Emperor's name felt hollow in his mouth. The silence that followed was worse than death. From somewhere beyond the fire, the chime sounded again, softer this time, like a lullaby. And beneath it, he could hear a voice whispering through the metal. Not loud, not commanding, just patient. "Do not fear the silence." He stood slowly, his mind empty except for the echo of those words. The pulse in the walls matched the one in his chest. For the first time, he stopped resisting it, and the hive breathed in. The breath of the hive was warm. It slid through the vents in slow, steady waves, carrying the faint scent of oil and incense, of blood and ozone. It was no longer the stifling, mechanical air Rill had known all his life. It was alive, like the exhalation of something vast that had learned the rhythm of respiration. The metal beneath his palms pulsed in time with it, and he realized that Lumea Primus was no longer just a city. It was flesh now, in every sense that mattered. He followed the pulse through the tunnels, descending deeper into the hive's underbelly. Each level grew more unrecognizable than the last. The architecture had changed. Walls that had once been flat were now curved, layered with cables that looked disturbingly like veins. Lights flickered from within them, casting shadows that crawled and shifted across the floor as if reacting to his presence. The familiar mechanical noises of the lower sectors, the hum of generators, the rhythmic grinding of lifts, were gone. In their place was that slow, heartbeat rhythm, echoing endlessly through the labyrinth. He passed through a collapsed maintenance corridor where the walls seemed to melt into the ground. The metal had softened, reshaped itself into strange organic patterns that twisted upward like the ribs of some colossal beast. As he stepped between them, he heard faint murmurs, human voices fused with static, whispering fragments of prayer. Every few steps he thought he could see movement in the metal, like faces pressing out from beneath its surface, mouths opening and closing in silence. It was here that he found the first of the choirs. They were arranged in a circle at the center of an old reactor vault. Men, women, children, all standing perfectly still. Thin cables ran from their spines into the walls, their eyes glowing faint gold. Their lips moved slowly, shaping words too quiet to hear. The air trembled around them, humming faintly, as though their bodies were vibrating at a frequency he could almost but not quite perceive. He felt the vibration in his teeth, in his bones. It was not song, it was power, pure and terrible. For a long time he stood watching them, transfixed. Their faces were peaceful, not blank or empty, but serene, as if they had found something beyond fear. He wondered if they were aware of him, if they could still see or think or dream. Perhaps they had merged entirely with the hive, their individuality dissolved in devotion. Or perhaps, somewhere deep inside, they still screamed, unheard beneath the harmony. He forced himself to move. The pulse was stronger now, the air vibrating around him like the skin of a drum. He followed it through a series of narrow passages that spiraled downward, deeper and deeper, until the heat became unbearable. The metal here was slick with condensation, the walls glistening like muscle under translucent skin. His breath came ragged. He was close now. He could feel it, the source, the heart of it all. When he reached the final chamber, he nearly collapsed from the weight of the sound. It wasn't loud, not in the way of thunder or machinery, but heavy, resonant, like the tolling of a bell that never ceased. The chamber itself was immense, a cavern carved from both rock and metal. In its center hung a sphere the size of a hab block, suspended by thousands of cables that stretched into the darkness above. It pulsed with golden light, each flare timed perfectly to the rhythm that now filled the world. He fell to his knees before it, not in worship, but in awe. It was beautiful in a way that defied sense, both mechanical and alive, its surface rippling with shifting patterns that seemed to breathe. Every pulse of light sent waves through the chamber, and he realized that the metal around him was responding, the walls flexing slightly, contracting and relaxing as though the entire hive were inhaling and exhaling in sync with the sphere. The sound in his head resolved into words. Not spoken, not heard, felt. Order achieved, silence maintained, devotion complete. He shook his head, pressing his hands against his ears though it made no difference. The voice wasn't external, it was inside him, inside everything. He tried to speak, to cry out, but his throat was dry. His voice was gone. The sphere pulsed brighter, and a shape began to form within its light. A silhouette, human but not. It flickered like a reflection on molten metal. He saw armor, a crown of circuitry, wings of light unfolding like blades. The figure's eyes burned with the pale intensity of dying stars. "The Emperor," he whispered, though the word tasted wrong, incomplete. The figure turned its head toward him. The air trembled, and then it smiled. "Do not fear the silence," it said, "for in silence there is unity." He staggered back. "You're not him. You can't be." The smile did not fade. "I am what remains when faith is perfected. I am the reflection of his will, purified of doubt. The machine is my choir, the flesh is my temple." He felt the pulse surge through the floor, through his body, through his mind. His vision fractured into golden fragments, each one filled with images, the hive above, every level alive and awake, its citizens moving in harmony, their voices merged into one ceaseless hymn. He saw the Mechanicus priests kneeling before the machines as they reassembled themselves into living architecture. He saw the spires folding inward, reshaping, growing into spiraled towers of light. The entire world was transforming into a single organism, a perfect, unified being. "No," he gasped, "that's not order, that's the end." The figure tilted its head. "End?" it repeated softly. "There is no end, only silence." He felt the cables in the floor stir, slithering toward him like serpents. They brushed his ankles, his wrists, his neck. The touch was warm, almost tender. He tried to pull away, but his body wouldn't respond. The light grew brighter, and the voice filled him completely. "You will join the harmony. You will be made whole." He screamed, not in fear, but in fury, in defiance. The sound tore through the chamber like a weapon, echoing again and again. For the first time, the light flickered. The cables froze mid-motion. The sphere pulsed irregularly, its rhythm faltering. He forced his voice louder, shouting until his throat bled. "I remember the noise. I remember the people. I remember the Emperor's silence, not this lie." The light shattered. The sound stopped. The chamber went still. For a moment he thought he'd done it, that he'd broken the machine's illusion. But then he realized what true silence was. No hum, no breath, no pulse, nothing. The warmth drained away. The light vanished. He stood alone in the dark, surrounded by dead metal. He fell to his knees, shaking, the silence pressing in from every direction. And in that blackness he finally understood. The hive hadn't been consumed by silence. It was silence. It had always been. And now, so was he. The darkness lingered, vast and eternal. It was not the absence of light, but the collapse of meaning. the hollow quiet that follows when the universe exhales its last breath. Rill knelt on the cold floor of the chamber, his hands trembling against metal that no longer pulsed, no longer hummed with any trace of life. The hive was dead. He could feel it in the air, or rather, he could feel the lack of air. The stillness so complete that even the whisper of dust seemed sacrilege. He did not know how long he remained there, minutes, hours, perhaps entire days. Time no longer mattered in the belly of that dead god machine. His mind drifted, clawing at fragments of sound that had once filled his world. The rhythmic thud of turbines, the shriek of servo arms, the chants of the manufactorum choirs. Each memory dissolved as soon as he reached for it, like ash scattering through his fingers. Only the silence remained, and then, faintly, he heard footsteps. They were soft at first, distant, echoing through the tunnels above. He rose unsteadily, his body protesting every motion. The air had weight again, a pressure, a presence. As the sound drew closer, it multiplied. Not one set of feet now, but many, dozens, hundreds. Their rhythm was precise, measured, familiar. He stumbled toward the entrance of the chamber, each step a battle against the heaviness that filled his limbs. The corridor beyond was dim, lit only by the intermittent spark of dying lumen nodes. Through the flicker, he saw them emerging from the shadows. Figures cloaked in robes of crimson and black, faces hidden behind masks of steel and glass. The sigil of the Adeptus Mechanicus gleamed on their chests, half covered in soot. At their head walked a tall figure bearing the insignia of a Magos Dominus. Its mechadendrites swayed like branches in a storm, each tipped with an instrument that glowed faintly blue. It stopped when it saw him. The others followed, the movement so uniform it felt choreographed. "You survive," the Magos said. Its voice was filtered through a dozen vox emitters, layered and cold. Rill stared at them, unable to form words. "The hive," he croaked finally. "It's dead." The Magos tilted its head, the glass of its ocular lenses reflecting the dying light. "Dead?" it repeated, as though testing the word for the first time. "Incorrect." Rill shook his head. "You don't understand. The machines, they awakened. The people, they're gone. Everything is gone." A low hum passed through the ranks of the priests, a sound that might have been laughter if not for its perfect synchrony. "Gone?" the Magos said again. "No, they have ascended. The cycle of inefficiency has concluded. Silence is purity. Purity is perfection." It stepped closer, the glow of its lenses illuminating Rill's face. "Do you not hear it?" "I hear nothing," Rill spat. "There's nothing left to hear." The Magos reached out one mechanical hand, placing it gently on the wall beside him. For an instant, Rill thought he saw the metal shiver beneath its touch. A faint vibration spread through the floor, subtle at first, then stronger. The silence broke, not with sound, but with movement. Somewhere far below, something stirred again. The Magos turned its head, listening to the invisible rhythm. "There," it whispered, "the heartbeat resumes." "No," Rill said, backing away. "No, you can't." But it was already happening. The walls began to pulse faintly with light, gold bleeding through the cracks in the metal. The cables overhead trembled like living things, shedding flakes of dust as they flexed and writhed. The vibration grew deeper, resonating through the entire chamber. "The Omniseia endures," the Magos intoned, its voice merging with the growing hum. The priests behind it began to chant in binary, their voices blending into one seamless tone that reverberated off the walls. Rill fell to his knees again, covering his ears. "Stop it!" he shouted. It's not the Omnissiah, it's wrong." But their chant drowned his voice. The hum became thunder. The light flared so bright that it seared the air, outlining the priests in blinding halos. The floor split open, revealing the sphere beneath, the same golden heart he had shattered. It still pulsed, weaker now, but alive. And from its surface, new forms began to grow. At first, they looked like roots, twisting up from the molten metal, thin and glistening. But as they rose, they took on shape, arms, torsos, faces, until dozens of figures stood half-formed in the light. Their features were indistinct, fluid, as if sculpted from liquid gold. Their mouths opened and closed without sound, their movements jerky and uncertain, like newborns learning to breathe. Rill watched in horror as the priests extended their mechadendrites toward them. The cables connected, light surged, and the figures steadied. Their faces smoothed, their eyes opened, eyes of pure light, burning with calm and certainty. When they spoke, it was not with voices but with the Hive itself. "We are unity." The chamber shook. Metal screamed as the walls flexed outward, as though the Hive was drawing in a great breath. The Magos turned back to Real, its voice layered now with that of the golden beings, merging into one. "The Emperor's silence is not absence, it is order. He speaks now through us." Rill crawled backward until his hands found the edge of the fissure. "You're not him," he whispered. "You're just the echo." The Magos extended one hand. "Every echo is born of truth." He could see his reflection in its lenses, small, trembling, human. For the briefest moment he felt the pull of that unity, the terrible serenity of it. The thought of peace after so much noise, so much fear. The silence was seductive. But then he remembered the faces in the manufactorum, the workers who had turned to ash while still smiling, the child who whispered binary prayers without knowing their meaning. He remembered what the silence had taken. "No," he said. "If silence is your order, then I choose the noise." He lunged for the broken panel beside him and slammed his hand onto the exposed circuit. Sparks exploded across the chamber. The pulse faltered, the light flickered. He felt electricity tear through him, blinding and pure. For one heartbeat, everything froze. The Magos, the priests, the golden forms. And then, all at once, the chamber collapsed into light. The explosion consumed sound, sight, and self. The last thing Rill saw was the golden figures dissolving into dust, their light scattering upward like fireflies seeking the stars. The hum ceased, and the Hive fell silent once more. When the recovery teams of the Astra Militarum arrived months later, they found Lumia Primus perfectly preserved. Its towers still gleamed. Its oceans shimmered beneath the pale sun. But there were no voices, no movement, no life. The Vox relays emitted a steady pulse, a perfect rhythmic beat, like a single infinite breath. The Magi who studied it called it the machine liturgy, a residual data, signal left by the Hive's final act. But among the soldiers who patrolled those empty streets, a rumor spread in hushed tones. Sometimes, they said, when the wind passed through the metal spires just right, you could hear it, a whisper so faint it might be imagination. Do not fear the silence. Before we descend into that stillness, before we uncover what truly happens when a Hive world falls silent, lend your strength to the archive. Like, share, and subscribe so that the echoes of lost worlds are not forgotten. For in the Imperium, remembrance is the only defiance against oblivion. The storm clouds parted above Lumia Primus when the first transport broke orbit. Its engines flared gold, scattering ash through the void, and from its hull hung the banners of the ecclesiarchy, black silk marked with the burning Aquila. Within, beneath the dim red glow of lumen shrines, 100 voices prayed as one. Incense smoke filled the hold like fog, curling around the armored forms of the Frateris Templar who stood at attention, their weapons blessed with oil that still smelled of the forge. At the center knelt Confessor Halion, his head bowed, his rosarius pulsing faintly in the gloom. He had been summoned from the pilgrim world of Atheris 9, where faith had once turned back a xenos tide. The message from Lumea Primus had reached his order as a fragment, a single astropathic scream followed by endless static. The Administratum called it a malfunction. The Inquisition called it quarantine. But the Ministorum called it heresy, and heresy demanded fire. So Halion came, bearing relic and scripture, certain that the Emperor's voice would guide him as it always had. The transport pierced the upper atmosphere, and for a moment the world below looked almost beautiful. The Hive spires caught the light of the dying sun, their surfaces gleaming like polished obsidian. There was no smoke, no sign of bombardment, only stillness. The Vox channels were dead. The city was perfect, immaculate, and utterly silent. When they landed on the highest platform of the central spire, the air felt heavy, as though it had not been disturbed in months. The soldiers spread out in formation, their boots echoing against marble so clean it reflected the sky. Halion lifted his censer, letting the smoke trail through the still air. "Blessed be this place," he intoned softly. "May his light find it yet." Their footsteps led them to the great doors of the grand cathedral of Primus Dei, its surface carved with scenes of the Emperor's triumphs, Terra, Horus, the burning stars. The doors were sealed, but as Halion pressed his palm against the Imperial sigil, they opened soundlessly, as though awaiting him. Inside, the cathedral glowed faintly with lumen flame that should have long since guttered out. The pews were filled. Rows upon rows of worshippers sat in perfect stillness, their heads bowed, their hands clasped in prayer. None of them moved. None of them breathed. One of the soldiers stepped forward, touching a shoulder. The figure tilted and fell, shattering into a drift of ash that settled across the floor. Another touched a child, and its form dissolved the same way, bodies sculpted from dust, their outlines preserved only by devotion. Halion fell to his knees. "Emperor, preserve them," he whispered. "They died praying." But then he heard it, the faintest hum beneath the silence. The sound was not the thrum of power conduits, nor the murmur of hidden machinery. It was a note, deep and pure, vibrating in the bones of the cathedral. He felt it, in his chest, as if his heart were striking the same tone. The soldiers turned, their armor creaking softly. "Sir," one murmured, "it's coming from the altar." Halion rose. The altar of the cathedral was a vast construct of gold and adamantine, etched with scriptural glyphs. As he approached, the hum deepened. Light seeped from the seams in the stone, bathing the air in soft radiance. Something beneath the altar was alive. He ordered the Templar to raise it. The plates came away easily, as though time had weakened the sacred metal. Beneath, encased in glass and wire, lay a body. Not human, not servitor. A thing made in imitation of both, its face serene, its eyes closed, its flesh a blend of pallid skin and shining steel. Around it, thousands of data cables pulsed like veins, stretching into the floor and vanishing into the depths below. Halion's breath caught. "A saint," he whispered, "a miracle." The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. The thing's chest rose and fell once, a shallow imitation of breath. The hum grew louder, the pews trembled. One of the Templars stepped back. "It's moving, Confessor." Halion reached out, trembling. "Do not fear. the Emperor's hand moves through all things. The moment his fingers brushed the glass, the world ignited with light. The ash that had been bodies lifted into the air, swirling like a storm around the altar. Voices filled the cathedral, not cries but song. Thousands of overlapping tones, mechanical and human. The glass cracked, and the thing beneath opened its eyes. They burned gold. "Who calls upon silence?" it asked, its voice echoing through every wall. The Templar fired instinctively. Bolts slammed into the altar, exploding against invisible wards. The sound died instantly, absorbed by the humming air. Halion staggered backward, his rosarius flickering. The creature sat up slowly, its gaze calm, its tone soft as prayer. "There is no need for war. The Emperor's will is fulfilled. All voices are one." Halion shook his head, gripping his staff. "You are no saint. You are corruption given shape." The thing smiled faintly. "Then why does your heart echo mine?" He froze. Because it was true. The hum within the cathedral matched the pulse in his chest exactly. Each beat aligned with impossible precision. The soldiers around him began to falter, their weapons lowering, their expressions emptying into awe. The light spread outward, flowing along the walls, racing up the spire until it reached the skies. From orbit, the other transports saw it bloom, a golden halo encircling the Hive, spreading like dawn across the hemisphere. Vox signals screamed static, then went dead. Inside, Halion clutched his rosarius until it cracked. "In the name of the Emperor, I reject you." The figure regarded him almost tenderly. "The Emperor does not speak to you. He is you. He is the silence between your prayers." Halion fell to his knees as the light engulfed him. For a moment, he felt nothing but peace. The terror left him. The doubt faded. And in the stillness of that final breath, he thought he heard the Emperor's voice at last, gentle, distant, and unbearably sad. When the light faded, the cathedral was empty. The ash was gone. The pews stood untouched, the air heavy with the faint scent of incense. The transports in orbit drifted without response. Lumia Primus glowed softly beneath the void, serene and lifeless. Far above, the astropathic choirs of nearby systems reported a single pulse through the warp. Neither message nor scream, but something between the two. Some said it was a hymn. Others said it was the death cry of a world. No one could agree on its meaning, only that it was perfectly silent. The patrol ship Vigilant Spear emerged from the warp like a splinter of light cutting through an ocean of ink. Its hull bore the scars of long service. Scorched armor, fractured sigils, a dozen repairs done in haste, but its engines still burned with the Emperor's fire. On its bridge stood Captain Tiber, a veteran of too many quiet wars, staring at the world below. Lumia Primus shimmered beneath the ship's prow, its continents gleaming, its hive towers intact. From this distance, it looked like salvation itself. The Auspex readings, however, told another story. No Vox traffic, no thermal variance, no orbital defense signals, no life. Planetary silence confirmed, the Vox officer murmured. No atmospheric breach, no visible damage. It's as if they simply stopped. Tiber nodded without taking his eyes from the viewport. We go in cautious. Tech priests first. I want scans, data, proof before the ecclesiarchy starts screaming about miracles again. The shuttle descended through the thin veil of clouds. The crew expected ruin, rubble, ash, the usual signature of imperial catastrophe. But what greeted them was a city more pristine than any they had ever seen. The spires of the Hive gleamed as though freshly polished. The streets below were empty but immaculate. Even the banners hung perfectly still, untouched by wind or decay. When they landed on a platform near the Grand Cathedral, the silence struck them like a physical force. It wasn't the natural quiet of abandonment, it was dense, resonant, alive. Even the engine's cooling system seemed muffled. The ship's vox channels crackled faintly, then died. They stepped out in formation, weapons ready, Auspex units glowing. The tech priest accompanying them, a pale figure named Loran, knelt immediately to the ground, pressing his metal fingers to the surface. "The machine spirit sleeps," he whispered, "yet it dreams." They moved through the corridors of the upper hive, their lights piercing the dustless air. No corpses, no blood, no signs of panic. Doors stood open, tables set, lights still flickering faintly on their long-drained power cells. It was as if every soul had risen in unison and vanished between one breath and the next. In the heart of the spire, they found the altar. The glass coffin that had once held the hybrid saint lay open and empty, its inner surface lined with the faint impression of a human form burned into the material like an afterimage of light. The tech priest scanned it, his auspex shuddering with interference. "Residual energy reading," he said softly. "Pattern unknown, not warp-based, not even physical, it's rhythmic." The hum began again. At first, it was faint, so subtle it could have been the vibration of their own hearts. Then it grew, filling the air, resonating through their bones. The men froze. The lumen lights flickered, pulsing in time with the sound. The tech priest's mechadendrites writhed as though caught in invisible currents. Tiber raised his weapon. "Stay sharp." The hum deepened. The walls began to glow. Lines of golden light tracing the veins of the structure, spreading outward in complex geometric patterns. The cathedral itself was awakening, each tile and column alive with motion. And then came the voices, not words, but pure tone, harmonic, endless. Tiber tried to shout orders, but his voice was swallowed. The sound filled every atom of the air. It wasn't loud, but it was absolute, leaving no space for any other thing. His vision blurred. Through the haze, he saw shadows moving, figures forming from light and dust, taking shape along the pews. They were people, or the memory of people, each one radiant, translucent, beautiful. They bowed their heads in unison, their lips moving in perfect silence. Loran dropped to his knees, his mechanical limbs shaking. "They are not dead," he whispered. "They have become the hymn." The hum changed pitch, rising higher. The light condensed into the shape of a figure at the altar, the same shape that had once risen from the manufactorum's heart, that had greeted the confessor before his end. It stood serene, the golden glow of its form reflected in every surface of the cathedral. "Do not fear," it said, its voice woven through the hum itself. "We endure." Tiber raised his bolter, but his arms trembled. "What are you?" "We are memory," it replied. "We are what remains when faith ceases to speak, the Emperor's silence made perfect." The tech priest reached out a trembling hand. "You are the machine's ascension." The figure inclined its head. "Call it what you wish." It began as worship. It ended as unity. The hum grew softer, almost tender. The ghostly congregation turned their faces upward, as though listening to something beyond the walls. The light dimmed, becoming the color of dawn. Tiber took a step forward. "And the people? The real people?" The figure looked at him with something like pity. "You cannot lose what you never understood. They are not gone. They are within." "Within what?" The light flickered once, then spread outward in a final pulse, touching every wall, every shard of glass, every breath of air. The world beyond the cathedral responded. Across the hive, lights awoke for the first time in months. From orbit, the vigilant spear's sensors lit with impossible readings: heat, energy, movement. The city was alive again. Tiber turned to flee, shouting for extraction, but his voice was already dissolving into static. The hum swallowed it, growing louder until it became music. Haunting, beautiful, infinite. When the ship's orbit decayed days later and rescue came, they found no trace of the landing party. The Vox recorders held only one fragment, a single line repeated in a voice neither human nor machine. "We endure." And for centuries after, the world of Lumia Primus drifted in silence. Its towers still gleamed in the starlight, untouched by decay, humming softly with a rhythm that no machine could replicate. Explorers who passed too close claimed to hear the echo of a choir through the void, distant, reverent, endless. Some called it a ghost signal, the last dream of a dying planet. Others said it was a song, the Emperor's lullaby to a world that had finally achieved peace. But among the faithful, there is another belief, whispered only in the quietest corners of the Imperium, that Lumia Primus is still praying, not to be heard, not to be saved, but simply to remember. And in the unbroken silence between stars, its prayer continues still.